It's been a little over a year since Secrets of the Storm was released, and Gearbox has arrived with a new expansion for Risk of Rain 2. So the question is it any good? Yeah, it's pretty good. I have to say, I was expecting this expansion to be at least pretty solid, seeing as I think if Alloy Collected had a bad launch, it would probably spell the end of Risk of Rain as an IP, even if they did come around to fix it later like they did with Secrets of the Storm. Despite the fact that I think Seekers is pretty alright now, I imagine a lot of people still feel the burn of its launch, and general gaming audiences are probably most familiar with how the patch kind of destroyed the game, rather than any of the cool stuff it might have added. Gearbox was definitely firing on all cylinders with this update, and you could really tell. Even comparing Alloy to post-rework Seekers, I think this expansion is a lot better on basically every front. Let's start off with the new survivors. While Seeker is one of my favorite characters in the game, I think Operator and Drifter give her a good run for her money. Seeker was really cool, and while personally I don't really like Railgunner and Void Fiend that much, I think that they're pretty good additions to the cast. I can't really say the same for False Sun and Chef though. False Sun is, on paper, kind of an interesting idea, being a playable boss character, but I feel like he's kind of boring and honestly a bit straightforward when compared to other survivors, especially next to some of the later additions. And while Chef is a fan-favorite returning character, even post-rework, I find that he's still a bit clunky, and I don't think his uniqueness really shines through unless you're using that R that upgrades your other abilities. Operator and Drifter, while aren't as game-changing as Seeker, both have their own identities that are fairly fleshed out amongst the cast, making them welcome additions in my opinion. My only complaint is that I wish the drones Operator had felt a bit more impactful. While it's cool that they all have special mouse-2 interactions and allow for Operator to use their ship for longer, they don't really do as much as I would like, especially when compared to how Drifter interacts with Scrap. I think it'd be really cool if different tiers of drones give Operator a buff depending on their rarity, or at least respawn after getting destroyed like their inherent ones. Speaking about drones, the new drone system is long overdue. They went from something that you maybe might buy if you had a little bit extra money, to actually having a more tangible impact on gameplay, especially in the early game. I wish there were more drone combining stations though, and that you could combine drones with different types to get fusions, but I imagine there might be too many combinations to make that a realistic ask, so I don't really mind this on the game. New items are pretty fun. I think complexity creep of Seekers has been pulled back slightly with these items, but there's also less of them, which I do actually like. The item pool is getting more and more bloated with stuff that you wouldn't want to pick up, so I think it's a good direction to add less and less with every expansion, assuming that Gearbox decides to continue supporting the game. There's still no movement speed red item, which I think would be a fun design space. It just hasn't really been explored yet, and would make getting Ventic Bloom feel a lot less bad as the game progresses if you don't get randomly kneecapped in terms of mobility. I do wish that they added more void items though. This is now 2 expansions in a row that they haven't done anything with the concept, and it's a bit disappointing because it's an easy way to add derivative items that normally wouldn't make the cut while not diluting the item pool. Music is pretty good. I know that Gearbox brought on a new composer for Alloy, and it sounds pretty good. I was worried it would be too different from what came before, but it fits in very well. The new stages and enemies are also fine additions. I'm not super in love with them. They don't shake the game up a whole ton, with the exception of the Invalidators, which are a welcome addition. Ultimately, I think most of them just kind of serve as new backdrops, which is, again, totally fine. They're not invasive in an annoying way like the Gilded or Twisted Elites were on launch. Speaking of elite types, we have one new one in the Collective type, which I think is pretty cool. Risk of Rain 2 generally punishes melee characters for having to get close to enemies, putting yourself at massive risk. Elites just kind of exasperate this issue by making you vulnerable to incredibly crippling debuffs. In comparison, Collective Elites have a projectile shield around them, making it so you actually have to get into melee range to fight them. It's nice to see an elite type that doesn't actually punish melees again, and forces ranged characters to interact with enemies more in a game where generally you want to stay as far away from them as possible. Talking about survivors a bit more, the new cosmetics are interesting. Not particularly my style, but any addition in this category is a nice one, but it's a bit lame that there are no new costumes for any of the DLC survivors. I get that it would lock some of the content away behind some of the other DLCs, but it does feel a bit lame that not every survivor is getting equal love. There's also no new abilities for other survivors, which, while understandable, is also a bit disappointing. As more complex characters are getting added to the game with more unique mechanics, it makes some of the original survivors feel really dated. I would like to see some of them get something new to play with, to spice up their current gameplay, seeing as the game has been out for so long that they feel kind of stale in comparison. Okay, so that's all the non-spoiler stuff. Everything from this point onwards is going to get into new boss fights and some of the other new additions. If you don't want to hear any of that, but you still want to know my overarching opinion, you can skip to the timestamp here, whatever it's going to be, if I remember to add this in. The new boss fight is pretty cool. It's There's a pretty grand feeling to it by having it kind of going through a few different fights where you're like, oh, this is the new final boss, but oh, it's not really, and then it's, oh, this is the new one, and then, oh, actually, it's the precursor to the other actual final boss. That's pretty neat. I think the fights themselves are also a lot of fun. The False Sun fight I was never really a fan of, even after the rework. It was just kind of like, okay, but this one feels like you're actually doing a lot more than just like shooting them over and over again. I will say, my friends and I did actually experience a bug in multiplayer when after picking up the Matrix Core things and returning to the main item area. As soon as one player goes through the tunnel, it will close and the Umbra will spawn. That includes if you are playing as a droid after you died, and as a droid, you're pretty fast, so you can get from one end of the tunnel to the other before it closes completely. So you could soft lock yourself with that. So if you're playing with friends, make sure to try to walk through the tunnel together to, you know, not accidentally trigger and flag anything. The new item combination thing with Chef and the Cyber Shop thing is kind of neat. It's a nice way to be able to get some pretty difficult to obtain items. It uses a lot of items that normally would be just scrap. So I do like that this being a thing will actually kind of enforce a decision where you have to wonder not whether to scrap the item or not if you actually want to hold on to it. I honestly don't like the new tier of items that much at all. I'm not really a fan, first of all, that they're the same color as the equipments. I also kinda am not a huge fan of the theming. I think the theme of this expansion has been super consistent, except for the one thing that is randomly just like, you know, it's just Chef. It also pushes all the new items in this tier to be themed around food, which I feel suss out some potential item combinations that could be really cool. But my biggest reason for not liking these might be a little strange. Let me go off on a tangent a bit to help describe what I'm kind of feeling. So, Magic the Gathering. Old game, right? There's a ton of mechanics in it. One that I really like is called Foretell. Basically, it allows you to play a card face down for later, like in Yu-Gi-Oh! It came out in 2021. And has gotten very little support since. But there's been a ton of other new mechanics added, a few that are very similar to Foretell, and it kind of annoys me. I wish they would just go back and just add more support to Foretell, because it feels really shallow right now, as it is. The point I'm trying to get here is that I'm a little afraid Gearbox might do something similar with stuff in the expansions of Risk Grand 2. Void items are really cool, but you can definitely feel that there's a lot more that can be going on with them than what it currently is. I'm afraid that with the next update or expansion, we're not going to see any more Void items again, but now we're also not going to see any new food items. I get that every update they want to add something new, but I would like to see them go back and revisit other systems that are already currently in the game. The drone rework has given me hope for this, but I'm not going to hold my breath. Overall though, I don't think there's a lot I can complain about. The expansion is pretty fun, and the launch is pretty stable, which I guess is an upgrade over what came before. This update feels a lot more cohesive to what Risk of Rain is than what I was expecting. At least it feels that way, maybe because of how Seekers made the game feel wildly different. I was tentatively excited for this patch, and I have to say I wasn't disappointed. And while I do have some fears about the complexity creep and feature inflation going forwards, I'm actually quite excited to see what Gearbox does next, and I hope that the success of Alloy Collected leads to a lot more fun down the road.